What about the risk of an unbalanced order? Because of the scale of Chinese investment in the BRI, because of the size of the Chinese market, what are the risks and the dangers for countries becoming over-dependent, over-reliant on China, and therefore suffering some constraints on their freedom of movement? That's certainly a debate that's happening in my country, where the dependence on Chinese business, plus some fairly aggressive influence operations run by parties linked to the link to Beijing, have now really led to a backlash, and people are starting to get uncomfortable. And there are a number of countries in the Pacific and Southeast Asia where the Chinese presence is really dominant. So can I ask the other panel, is that something you're concerned about? How can we all encourage diversity in our connectivity so that none of us has to stand in another's shadow? Perhaps I'll start with you, Mr. Secretary.
Well, I think it's nobody's case that infrastructure shouldn't be built. The issue is how it is to be built. And I can quite understand that many governments need infrastructure, because we all, irrespective of the political system we have to meet the aspirations of our domestic populations. But if speed is the only criterion by which we are going to judge that infrastructure, without recognizing there are consequences of how we have built that infrastructure, then that's where the dependency gets created, not simply because you create an infrastructure. The issue is really not of any individual project, but the standards that you set, the processes that you follow, the rules that you apply. There are international rule-making organizations, rule-setting institutions. Not all rules are ideal, certainly not from the perspective of the developing world, but we are working within those rule-setting institutions to improve them. If you have players who come in and set an entirely different set of rules, who set a different set of standards in many countries where there are no standards, where there are weak rules, where there are weak procedures, you automatically create the infrastructure or the ecosystem for dependencies. And I think, therefore, the real issue is not whether Africa or any other continent will become dependent on any country, but what the rest of the world is going to do to ensure that there is a certain rule setting, and that rule setting globally is not disrupted because any one country or any group of countries or any other institution, for that matter, decides it has its own set of rules and then proceeds to do this regardless. And I think that's the key.
Thank you.
Yes, very good question. Actually, I have 3 points to make. First, I think the era of hegemony is over. Any attempt for new hegemony or revitalization of the old hegemony would be doomed to failure, be it American, whatever. I think we need to go beyond hegemony and to think of more cooperative rather than a dominant force sets the rules for the other. And I think regionally it's impossible, globally it's impossible and impractical, and we should distance from hegemonic thinking. Second, I think what's important is to look at, especially our region, not just from a pure geopolitical perspective. Of course, we can look, but look at Afghanistan. Afghanistan has been the victim of geopolitical competitions. Finish it. And start working on economic development, because economic development of Afghanistan is a step forward for regional peace and security. So the approach that you choose is very important. Is it just a pure geopolitical competition, or it is not based on this thinking, it's more an economic development. Finally, my third point is you have to work on bilaterals, trilaterals, and multilaterals in a way that ensure that the relationship be steady, be gradually working, and not be impacted by the fluctuations of international politics. Let me just a little bit explain. For example, Iranian-Indian relationship. I think what happens to China, what happens to United States Chinese, Indian American, should not impact the real interest of Iran and India, which is to have a good relationship. The more we have this relationship, beyond just the fluctuations of hegemonic, non-hegemonic tendencies, I think the region would be much more secure. And for that to happen, we have to diversify relationship. I mean, bilaterally, for example, between Iran and India, between Iran and Afghanistan, Iran and China, there should be different areas, multiple layers of activities, not just to link on one geopolitical loose concept that if it is damaged, then the totality of damage would be for not just the states. I was very impressed by bringing the element of people to the discussion. I think it is good for the people and it is more, let's say, enduring and working. Thank you.
Thank you. Istvan?
I was thinking about the title of this conference, Managing Disruptive Transitions. That's impossible without China. So we are very interested to make economic cooperation with China, with India, with Russia, with the United States, with the planets. Hungary is a small country without gas, without fossil fuels. We have no minerals. We just have knowledge-based capital. And we are able to try into the global value chains without knowledge-based capital. But we get gas from Russia. We get many minerals and other sustainable things from the planets, from the countries that I mentioned. So I think we have to work together. We are very interested in the diversification, mainly in the energy field, because we have no energy sources. So I think we have to work together. We think there is not threatened from China, as you asked it. I think we are able to preserve our identity, are able to preserve our independence, our sovereignty, but we are trying to build up multilateral economic cooperation, connections. You know, we are very interested, as an open export-driven economy, we are very interested in the multilateral trade agreements. You know, there are many problems with that because there is a debate between the multilateral and bilateral free trade agreements. And we think that's very important for us. So we would like to continue, as the member of the European Union, this trend, this approach. We would like to build up economic cooperation with the different countries, with the different giant countries too.
Good.